and welcome everyone, especially my bosses, the Regents. Glad to have you. And Justice Taylor, always nice to have you. This is a real honor for me, both because of my regard for our speaker, but also as one was a practicing lawyer for 28 years and had a few rounds with the Constitution in those days. And so I think this is a very important event, and I really appreciate you hosting this, Sheila. It's a wonderful series. So I'm to introduce the 2010 Constitution Day presenter, and it's, as you know, Andrew Lester. Andy Lester, I'll call him, was and is a practicing attorney and partner in the Edmond law firm of Lester, Loving, and Davies. He has had a broad experience. He has been a judge. He's been a professor. He has served the transition team for President Ronald Reagan and is a member, as mentioned, of the A&M Board of Regents. I have a special affinity for Regent Lester because he took my unexpired seat for 2 years and then was appointed to a full term, I think last year. And we're delighted. He's a very hard-working regent, and he is a great patriot and has brought us his daughter to this university, Susan, so we appreciate that as well. Regent Lester chairs the Oklahoma Advisory Committee for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He was recently hired by the Oklahoma House of Representatives, you may have read, to handle a corruption inquiry. Some would say that seems redundant with the legislature, but that's not. I don't feel that way, certainly. Andrew Lester has written over 80 articles on professional and public policy issues, and he's been interviewed in virtually every major media market. We're very lucky to have Andy Lester today to present constitutionalism in the 21st century. Is the rule of law still relevant? I don't know a more ardent defender of our Constitution than Andy Lester, and I can think of no more noble effort for a good lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Regent Andy Lester.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's great, always great to be on the campus of Oklahoma State University. You know, OSU is a land-grant institution, and one of the things I particularly appreciate about Oklahoma State University is that it takes that land-grant mission seriously. I'm proud to be connected to OSU in several ways. First, as mentioned, I'm just actually starting my 4th year, believe it or not, on the Board of Regents for the Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical Colleges, the board that governs OSU. I have 8 wonderful colleagues on the board. Glad to see a couple of them here. Let me just tell you a little bit, because I do get asked this question a lot. It doesn't have much to do with the Constitution, but about the OSU Regents. These folks serve without compensation, and they put in an incredible amount of time to do the work to make OSU a great institution of higher education. When I say that they work hard, I really mean it. There's no rule that requires it, but these folks regularly put in 15, 20, 30 or more hours every week without pay. And they do it because they love Oklahoma in general, and they love this institution, Oklahoma State University in particular, and they want to make sure that OSU fulfills its mission in the most excellent way. And so these folks really do a lot, generally not stuff that is not seen, to make this a better place. Second, as you heard, I actually have a daughter who attends Oklahoma State University, and Susan Lester, who is here in the audience today, thank you for coming. She regularly reminds me that she is actually the only member of our family who can claim to be a native Oklahoman. Though having lived in Oklahoma now for almost 30 years, I think I come close in any event. I've learned a lot about Oklahoma State University being on the Board of Regents, but I've learned a lot more actually being a parent of a student at Oklahoma State University, and one of the things that I learned, you've heard the dean talk about that this event is held on September 17th every year. If you check your calendar, we're a day off of that, September 16th. One of the things that I learned is from my daughter is that the campus gets rather empty on Friday afternoons. It occurred to me that I'd be happy to come up here and speak to a somewhat empty room. It's a lot more fun seeing all of you here. So the event was rescheduled to make it work with the calendar. So here we are, a day before Constitution Day. Why September 17th? Because that's the anniversary of the day that the Constitution was signed. I've been blessed with an enjoyable career and profession. Among other things, I litigate constitutional law cases. It's pretty cool. People actually pay me real live money to go argue cases in all kinds of courthouses involving intricate constitutional issues. Sometimes they involve state constitutional questions. Other times the federal Constitution is at issue. I will say it's not necessarily the most remunerative area of the practice of law, but it is intellectually stimulating and thoroughly fulfilling. If you have a chance to do it and feel called to do it, I highly recommend it. 223 years ago, tomorrow, 55 American leaders gathered, actually in July of that year in Philadelphia, for 2 months to discuss the future of the fledgling American Republic. The United States of America, a collection of 13 sovereign states, had only recently won independence from the world's only superpower. Continued independence was by no means guaranteed. Why were they called states? Well, the word state is actually an international law term. In international law, states are sovereign entities. France was a state, Spain was a state, Portugal was a state, so too were Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, where I grew up, and the rest. These states had banded together to gain independence, and against all odds, they prevailed. They had their independence, but continued independence was by no means certain. The British, from whom we had gained our independence, were never far away. After Yorktown and the Treaty of Paris, they didn't simply withdraw across the Atlantic Ocean. They did some of that, but they were also just across the border. They were in Canada. They were in the important islands of Bermuda, Jamaica, and others. The Spanish were in Florida. The French were never all that far away. And the western frontier was far from secure. The men who gathered in Philadelphia, delegates from most but not all of the states, knew, as did most of their fellow countrymen, that the existing order was not working. Both external threats and internal strife beset the new country. Debts were going unpaid. If invasion from without seemed possible, disintegration from within seemed virtually imminent. So the delegates to the Constitutional Convention came together, swore each other to secrecy, locked themselves in a small, unair-conditioned, barely ventilated room during a hot Philadelphia summer and went about the work of drafting a constitution. They worked to establish a central government and to create rules which would govern that system. Now, this was a truly remarkable event. I mean, think about it. The entire nation had a population roughly the size of Oklahoma's population today, about 3.5 million. 55 of the brightest minds came together. These were not people who agreed. Indeed, by this day, 223 years ago, only 39 of the 55 remained to sign the proposed Constitution. Some were bitterly opposed, yet they drafted this remarkable document, one that in the ensuing 2¼ centuries has been amended only 27 times. Only 27 times, or on average, only once every 5 years. And actually, it's really not quite that often. Let me point out how remarkable that is. Of the 27 amendments, 10 were added immediately as the Bill of Rights. 2 came about in short order thereafter, one in response to a Supreme Court ruling, another to avert a potential electoral disaster that was barely averted in 1800 in the election of the president and vice president. Another 6 decades passed before there was another amendment to the Constitution. And think about this. What do you think when most people, when they say who was the greatest president, they either say Washington or Lincoln, and I think more would probably choose Lincoln, at least as president. There's not a single amendment that was added to the Constitution during Lincoln's lifetime, not one. 3 came right after the Civil War to secure the rights of the former slaves. It then was another 43 years, and it's to the day, interestingly enough, before the next amendment was made to the Constitution. 2, which came about within a decade and a half of each other, essentially canceled each other out, first adopting, then repealing Prohibition. And the last amendment is one of the most fascinating. Number 27 actually was offered as part of the first, what we now call the Bill of Rights. But it wasn't adopted at that time. Unlike the first 10, it took over 200 years to gain the necessary votes for ratification. 7 states voted to ratify it in 1789 to 92. 1 in the entire 19th century, in 1873, voted to ratify it, and then 38 states from 1984 to 1996 voted to ratify it, and it became part of the Constitution in the 1990s. Now compare that to the Oklahoma Constitution. If you, the lawyers in the front are laughing, and they know what's coming. If you look in the official volumes of the Oklahoma statutes, the American Constitution takes a mere 11 pages. By contrast, the Oklahoma Constitution in the same volume covers 160 pages. I had to count these last night. And amendments. This November alone, according to the State Election Board, we will be voting on 10 amendments to the state constitution. That's just this November. 2 years ago, we approved 4 amendments to the Constitution, and we do this every couple of years. Well, the United States Constitution has governed us now from the end of the 18th century, throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and now 1 decade into the 21st century. Is it still relevant? The title to the topic today is the rule of law still relevant? Will it continue to be relevant? Will we continue to be a nation governed by the rule of law? And how do others view the notion of constitutionalism? And I told several of my colleagues and friends that I was making this address and had given it the title that it has. And a couple of them asked, well, what are you going to say? Is it relevant or not? Well, I told them I was scheduled to speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and that if the answer was no, I couldn't fill 30 to 40 minutes, so that would be too short. So let me get straight to the heart of the matter and answer my own question with an emphatic yes. It is still relevant. And what's my evidence for that conclusion? Well, look at the world around us and consider this. When the drafters of our Constitution emerged from that hot, humid room with their proposal, and when the states subsequently ratified it, this young country, and it was a young country at the time, it was what, 13 years old, if you go back to July 4th of 1776, had the first modern written constitution. Now today, throughout the world, nations repeatedly emulate the American model. At the beginning of this week, for example, you may have watched the American team win the World Basketball Championship in Turkey. Well, that same day, in Turkey, the citizens there voted to overhaul that nation's constitution to conform to Western standards. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying others do or even should copy our constitution or adopt our system. Yet, the notion of the rule of law has become a worldwide aspiration.